Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today it is time to do the first Power Rankings video for the 2025 UFL season. Training camp is just a couple days away, so it is that time of year to do the Training Camp Power Rankings video, which this year just so happens to be the first Power Rankings video for this season. Now, the first Power Rankings video is always a tough one to make, because you're having to look at how the team played last year, who's coming into the team this year, was there any coaching changes, the quarterbacks, a lot of things like that. But in all honesty, this was a pretty easy one to make compared to years past. Really, about half the league was very easy for me to rank, and the other four teams were still relatively easy, so I feel like this is going to be a good one. Now, before we get into the actual rankings, we have the 1,000 subscriber giveaway post still going on. It's in the community post tab, so go check that out and go enter that if you haven't already. Remember, you have to have Instagram and Twitter to claim your prize and all that. And I have another post that's about the Q&A we're doing, as we are doing a live stream for the 1,000 subscriber special tomorrow, 2 p.m., March 1st. Now, without further ado, let's get started with number 8, which shouldn't shock a single soul, the Houston Roughnecks. Yeah, they have no change from the end of last season. They're number 8. Now, why are they number 8? Well, the guy in the top right is a pretty good reason why by himself, Curtis Johnson. I have not seen a single person make any argument that he is anything but the worst coach in the league. Now, while guys like Ken Wisenhunt, Reggie Barlow, Anthony Back, even Stoops to a hit at a little extent, I've seen guys argue about their placements in their rankings, but CJ, I've never seen him anywhere but 8. I mean, come on. He had a lot of terrible challenges last year. There's some games, like especially the one against San Antonio late in the season, where there was just no reason to lose, even the one against Michigan late in the season. The best offense in the league joke where he said that when the team hadn't even scored 20 points or more than 20 points against the Renegades. It was just really, really poor decisions and just poor coaching. And the reason they're number 8 mainly is because this is a team that's one of the 2 teams that has fully overhauled their roster in a lot of ways. I mean, technically 3, but we'll get to that third team later in the video. But of those teams that overhauled their roster, they're the only one that doesn't have any real rhyme or reason to it. It's just kind of they're overhauling their roster to overhaul it. They got a new GM, but they kept CJ. Their coaching staff is almost identical to last season, so a lot of questions there. Now, we are doing every single team's most notable loss in the offseason. This is the only team I'm going to show the other 3 guys, because ARW, Jimmy Moreland, and Mark Thompson especially were some big losses. But yes, they had some big additions. Avery Jones at center is going to be a nice help to that god-awful offensive line they had. Anthony Brown Jr. at quarterback should be a very fun quarterback to watch. I honestly think this team's quarterback room is really good. I said it in the QB rooms video. They have a good QB room. Jalen McClendon has potential to be a great quarterback. Nolan Henderson has potential. Anthony Brown could be a really fun guy to watch. But running game is going to be a question. Yes, they still have who I would say is probably the best receiver in the league. Hall is definitely one of, if not the best. I think that when you consider who he had throwing the ball to him last year and the stats he put up, there's a good argument he's the best in the league, though a lot of people would say he's probably 2 or 3. And then outside of that, a lot of questions on the receiver position, the offense as a whole. And yes, they got Damon Arnett, who was a former first-round pick. There's a reason he's not in the NFL anymore, like multiple, but he is here now. If he works out, he could be huge for them. It's just tough. I mean, this team's offense was terrible last year. The defense was mediocre as hell, and their pass rush was terrible, which will lead to the biggest loss in a second. But look, this team was bad. Look, the Showboats were objectively the worst team in the league last year, and somehow the Roughnecks lost to them twice. That's why the Roughnecks were 8 in the power rankings and not Memphis, despite Memphis being a worse team than them. Memphis was like bottom 2 in every stat. Houston had a couple stats they were okay in. But Memphis, nothing. Yet Memphis still beat them twice. So, number 8, the Roughnecks, shouldn't be a shock to anybody. Their biggest loss was Chris Odom. When you consider some of the other front 7 losses, guys like Keontae Shaw, Toby Johnson, Ethan Westbrooks, Adam Rodriguez, Reuben Foster, among many other guys, and you consider that Odom pretty much said that he was not being utilized correctly in Houston this past season, it makes you wonder how many of these other guys felt the same way. And even then, Odom still had the most sacks in the team, and by a mile. He had over a third of the team's entire sack total. Yes, they had 14 sacks, that's it. So, really bad there. And Westbrooks was 2 at 3.5, and then Bingham had 1.5. That's how bad their pass rush was. But Odom was still the best on that team. He wasn't utilized properly, which I would assume means a lot of these other guys weren't utilized properly. I know some of them had injuries as well. And I know a couple of them back, like Sagapalu's back and all that. But overall, losing Chris Odom is a huge loss for this team, especially considering the fact that he went to a Texas rival. Yikes. Odom is a great player, and he's proved that he came off a bad injury, and he's still proved to be one of the most elite pass rushers in the league. Again, if he was utilized correctly, he would have been even better, and that's despite the fact that, again, he led the team in sacks with 5.5 and had nobody else really doing a ton in the pass rush area. Again, 8 TFLs insane. He was incredible. Losing him is the biggest loss. I know they had a lot of other losses, like I said, Mark Thompson, but Thompson wasn't the same player he was in 2023, whether that was because of the injuries or, again, poor coaching. Let you decide, but Odom, this is a huge loss, the biggest loss for them, easily Chris Odom. Number 7 is the DC Defenders. This was one of the tougher spots. 7 and 6 and 5 and 4 were the real tough spots, but 7 I'm going with DC. The main reason is the big three. The big three of their offense is Abram Smith, Jordan Ta'amu, and Ty Scott. Now, the reason this is the big reason they're low on this list is because Ty Scott, I respect him. He's going to be a great receiver for the team. The issue is Ta'amu and Smith. Smith was incredible in 2023, but he's coming off a very major leg injury, knee injury specifically. So you have to wonder, is he going to be fully back or not? Mark Thompson had a massive step back this past season, and while it was mainly because the offensive line, Darius Victor had a step back. Abram Smith, again, it's coming off a bad injury. He's the running back position. That's always a position you hate seeing ACL injuries and all that for. So is he going to be great? If he is, it's going to be a huge help, but if he's not, yikes. Because this team, when he went down, their running game was pitiful. So I would expect the same thing to happen if he ends up not being to the level he needs to be. Now, Jordan Ta'amu is a big question mark. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You can't excuse leading the league in turnovers twice. 2022 in the USFL, 2024 in the UFL. He's done it twice. Now, I know he hasn't had the best receivers in either of those two teams, but there's been other teams that had weak receiving cores as well, and their quarterback wasn't throwing as many interceptions as Ta'amu did. Again, this team in 2023 was really good, but they had multiple big-name receivers, mainly Lucky Jackson. Abram Smith was fully healthy, and that was the best the team was. Now, Reggie Barlow, there's a lot of questions about him as head coach. He had a pretty poor year coaching this past season. The decision to keep Ta'amu out there during the end of the season and not see what they had in Jalen McClendon could end up really looking like a bad decision. If we live in a universe where the Roughnecks end up having McClendon play most of the snaps and he plays really well and Ta'amu doesn't, gonna look horrid on DC's part. Now, they did have some big additions. Keandre Thomas, a cornerback. Spencer Sanders is a backup quarterback. Lynn Bowden at wide receiver. Again, wide receiver is a big deal. Their receiving position was not the best this past season. Their offensive line wasn't insane. But overall, they also suffer from being a pretty mediocre team in both offense and defense. Again, their defense was in the lower end. 222 points allowed, 301 yards per game allowed. One of the three teams with 300 yards per game allowed, and one of those teams that had over 200 points allowed. Yards per game, they were at 272. There was a big drop-off from the top four to the bottom four. They were part of that big drop-off. And the issue is they're not one of the teams that overhauled their roster in a lot of ways. And yes, they did get a lot of new players, but they're not one of the three teams that really overhauled their roster. And when you look at what they were last year, I don't know. I said it during the schedule ranking video about easiest to hardest, where I said DC looked to be the weakest team. Arlington's made a lot of big re-signings, which they've needed. DC, I just don't feel that way. I don't feel confident about their head coach. I don't feel confident about their quarterback. Their running back, I'm going to wait and see approach. Again, if he's back healthy, it's going to be great, and this team should move up a couple spots after week 1 and 2. But if he's not fully back healthy, this team's going to stay in the lower end of the tier, on the rankings and all that. I just find that people who think DC should be like one of those top teams, it's pretty hard to justify. The top 3 teams, which we all pretty much know what the top 3 teams are all better than this team. Even those 4 and 5 teams are both better than this one. And then when it comes to the team that you can probably guess is number 6, they overhauled their roster in a way which makes them kind of a threat. DC, I just don't feel that way. Now, their biggest loss was Kelvin Harmon. Their receiving core wasn't great. I said it before. Now, Chris Rowland is back. When you look at their receiving core, right, there's a big drop-off from Ty Scott and Kelvin Harmon. Now, when you also add in the fact that Harmon ended up missing the last few games of the season due to injury, you realize, yeah, this is a big loss for the team. If he was fully healthy, he would have led the team in receiving yards, and since he wasn't and he got hurt, didn't happen, but he still finished second at 375. 3 receiving touchdowns, one of the 3 guys that did it for this team. Missing him is a big deal. You have to really hope Bowden ends up being a good enough replacement for him. Will he? Hopefully, but we don't know for sure. They also lost a few other of these receivers on this list, as that's the one main area they really did try to overhaul, which I'm fully for it. The receiving core was not great last season. Wasn't the worst receiving core we've seen in spring football history, but it was low. Again, I just don't fully buy into the fact that DC is going to be a great team this season. I think that having Ta'amu at quarterback again is a risk. I feel like if you were to tell me that either McCarron or Ta'amu wouldn't have been back this season, last year, I would have assumed it would have been Ta'amu, because you can blame a lot more of the offensive struggles on Ta'amu than you could McCarron, yet they screwed over McCarron. Well, I'll get to McCarron later. So, DC, it's just, I'm not fully bought into Teamu being a great quarterback. I think he's very overrated. I think that 2023 season, he had an incredible roster around him, and he made him look much better than he is. I'm not saying he's a bad quarterback. I still think he's a solid quarterback. There's a reason why I did put him as high as I did on my returning quarterbacks list. I still think he's a solid quarterback. It's just on a tier list, he's not to the level of guys like a Luis Perez, like a Bryce Perkins based on potential, and like a Matt Corral. He's just not on their level, and a lot of people seem to think he is. I don't buy it. Will this take age like milk? Who knows? We'll see. Number 7, DC. Number 6 is going to be the Memphis Showboats. The Showboats move up one spot from where they finished last season, mainly because of their overhauled roster, with the 2 big coaching changes. Now, yes, they changed their whole coaching staff, but the main 2 was Wisenhunt and Jaron Horton. The offense guy in Wisenhunt, the defensive guy in Horton. Horton did really well with the Maulers team. He ended up being a huge reason why the team got so much better when he got more power and control when his father joined the team. The defense was a much bigger improvement. And you can see that by the notable additions being a bunch of 2023 Maulers defenders. Boogie Roberts is the biggest name of all those guys in terms of the fact that he was a great defensive tackle for him. Big question on why DC didn't keep him, especially since DC's defense didn't do all that well. There's a lot of other guys that ended up joining the team. You can go look at the roster, like Nicholas Thorne has a Google Sheets of the roster, and you'll see what I mean. Just a lot of former Maulers on the defense, and even some on the offense. This team feels like the Maulers 2.0 in a lot of ways, which is a good thing. It's why I moved them up from number 7, because I think that their overhauled roster has a vision, and it's to be the Maulers 2.0. The Maulers may not have statistically had the best defense, but most spring football fans would say that was the defense that you did not want to play. T. Will looked much better with that team than he did with the Showboats this past year, which granted, offensive line was a big difference. Again, the stats this team had were terrible, right? They allowed more sacks than every other team. Houston's offensive line was terrible. They allowed a lot of sacks, and Memphis was even worse by a country mile. Their overall offense, not good, the worst in the league yards per game. Their defense, also the worst in the league. It's only up from there. That's what I mean. When I was talking about earlier, they were the worst team in the league statistically and objectively, if it wasn't for Houston losing to them twice somehow. The overhauled roster is why I'm moving them up. When I look at the defense, I think the defense is going to be a much better unit than it was before. I think they have a better defensive coordinator. They have a better fit of what their defense is. Instead of being this kind of merger like it was with the Breakers and the Showboats, it's like they're mainly focusing on being a Maulers team with a bunch of pieces added. That's the biggest difference, because I feel like that's kind of what hurt them last season. What we expected to be their biggest strength ended up really hurting them, and that's they kind of went too far but not far enough in a weird way with the Breakers, where they added a lot of former guys into it, but they kind of made it a cohesive unit instead of having it be with the idea of this is a Breakers team that's playing in Memphis. I feel like this is in a lot of ways they're going to be based as a Maulers 2.0 team, which I think is a good idea. I think that if you can use what worked in 2023, it can help you be a better team. Now, I still don't think they're going to be insane, and still have them at number 6. I don't think they're as good as those top 5 teams. There's a lot of question marks. Their quarterback position is a big one. I'm personally not a fan of the let's bring 3 guys who have yet to win a playoff game as a starter in E.J. Perry, Troy Williams. Well, Troy Williams did win one. And Quentin Dormade. Troy Williams is a weird one. They won that game because that penalty, it wasn't a bad penalty, like as the ref screwed him. I mean, it was just a bad penalty the Panthers took late in that game. It's just, I'm not a fan of their quarterback room. I understand that why people do like them, but I feel like when you've seen those 3 guys, you know none of them is a superstar at this level. So the fact that they're sticking with those 3 guys and not getting a guy that could be a superstar, like a Spencer Sanders, like an Anthony Brown Jr., not a huge fan of that. But Troy Williams was with Jaron Horton, so it does make sense there. E.J. Perry did play against him in that great game in 2023. Makes sense there. And Dormady, they ended up trading a player that retired, so they didn't lose anything to get him. Again, number 6 in Memphis. I think this is going to be a very fun team to watch in a lot of ways. But number 6 can't put them much higher. Now, their biggest loss, though, I'm going to go with Vinny Papale. Now, there's a few other guys that currently haven't re-signed. Darius Victor's a big one. Does not look like he's returning. But currently, Vinny is not re-signed. This is a big one because legacy. He's been with this team since they were the Bandits in 2022. Now, while he did technically leave for a little bit to go to the Breakers, he ended up coming back, obviously, when the whole Breakers thing happened, where they, folded and all that. Even last year, still a great player. He had over 300 yards, one of the top receivers for the team. 5 receiving touchdowns, one of the highest in the league. Again, he's been a very solid receiver at that tertiary position for the past 3 seasons with the Showboats/Bandits. So you're losing a guy that's been a legacy type of player. That's like the Panthers losing Gidna. It wouldn't be a big loss just because of how good a player he is. It's because of how much of an impact he has. That's Vinny for this team. So losing him is a big deal. Now, again, we still have time to see them, re-sign. Like, just a couple days before this video is being posted, we saw Ajin Harris and Sal Cannella return to the Renegades. So who knows? Hell, maybe even the day before this gets posted, we see that Vinny ends up re-signing. But as of now, he hasn't. So this is the biggest loss to this point, is Vinny Papele. Great receiver that they're currently not with. They need to try and get him back. Huge impact for that team, but we'll see. Number 5 is going to be the Arlington Renegades. I haven't dropped one spot. Biggest reason, there's still a lot of guys they did lose. Vic Beasley, Henri St. Amour, a couple big defenders they ended up losing. Bobby Evans, they're like one really good lineman, not back. Lindsey Scott Jr., not playing anymore. Even though he never started, he looked to be a very solid potential backup or spot starter. So you lost a lot of big players there, and that's not even the biggest loss we'll get to later. Now, you did add Chris Odom. This is the Texas rival that I was talking about earlier. Huge addition. Jabril Cox, another huge addition to your defense. Kalen Ballage, a guy that should be a decent replacement for the guy we're going to talk about in just a couple of minutes. Now, Arlington is number 5. Biggest thing about them was they were really good on offense, really bad on defense. Defense, one of the worst in the league. Over 300 yards allowed, over 200 points allowed. One of those 3 teams that had that awful duology of stats. Now, offensively, the receiving core was insane. All 4 of those guys right there are back. Tyler Vaughn, Sal Cannella, Javonte Payton, Deontay Burnett. Your receiving core was expected to be a okay to good one, and it ended up being like the best in the league in a lot of ways. Luis Perez made this unit look insane. You almost had 2 guys with 500 yards. You were 4 yards away from it. So you're talking about an insanely good receiving core returning. The offensive line should be upgraded. Think about how good the team was last year, and that's without having a top-tier offensive line. If they have a better offensive line, oh my gosh, this offense is going to be crazy. The issue is the defense. You lost some of your bigger name players that you did have last year. Yes, you just got Ajin Harris back. That's a huge addition for that defense, or I guess re-addition. But it's still a big question mark. How good is this defense going to be? That's a big reason to have them at 5 and not 4. There's just a lot of big name players they need to sign. If they sign all their big name players that didn't retire, obviously, and brought them back, I would probably move them up to 4. But as it stands now, I think they're number 5. And a big reason for that is because their biggest loss is De'Veon Smith, running back. Huge loss. He was a very key part of that 2023 Renegades team, and he's been a spring football icon for a long time. And this past season, he was really good. 450 yards, led the team in rushing by a country mile. Now, they also lost Letty Brown, another running back they lost. So their top 2 running backs are both gone this season. Now, receiving yards, he's also had 180 of them. He was one of the league leaders, not the league leader, but up there in overall yards from scrimmage. He was a very, very, very good and versatile player that could be great in the backfield, as well as just running the ball. Again, only 2 fumbles and over 100 carries, and he didn't even lose either fumble. 3 rushing touchdowns. This was a really solid running back. 4.1 yards per carry, solid number there. Again, losing something like this is a big deal. The offense was incredible, and he was a huge reason why, because it made it to where you could use that play-action game. When you had a running back as good as De'Veon Smith, yes, you fear Luis Perez, but you also have to fear De'Veon Smith. You can't just fully commit to pass rush or dropping back to cover the run and all that. You made a very, very scary team with that. That's why it's such a big deal to have a great running back and a quarterback, because you can use that play-action game in a way that most teams can't. That was what made this duo so great. So losing De'Veon Smith does suck, but we'll end up seeing if the replacements do well. We'll see, but as of now, unless he re-signs, this is their biggest loss. Number 4 is the Battlehawks. This was one where I was debating on putting them 5 and 4, and I was like, yeah, they should probably be 4. Number 4 is honestly a really good spot for him. I've seen people online, because I've seen a couple other power rankings that have him at 4. People say it's too low. It's really not. 4 is a great spot for them because of the fact that this is a team that has big question marks, but also has really good talent. Their defense, I still think, was underappreciated last season. It was a very good unit, and bringing back both Mike Rose and Willie Harvey, as well as Peta, as well as a lot of other guys, this defense is still going to be a really good unit. Offensively, you added 2 former top 3 round picks in Denzel Mims and Andy Isabella. So those are 2 guys who could potentially be really good for a team that already brought back most of its best receivers. Rodrigo Blankenship at kicker should be a very fun replacement at kicker. Again, we'll see how well he does. It's just that was a big name, one of the very few big name kickers there are, and that was a good one. But of course, the biggest question is the quarterback position. Yes, Anthony Beck may have kind of publicly threw AJ under the bus and blamed him for last season's failure in the postseason and all that, which he did kind of do by talking about we need to evolve the quarterbacks we'll talk about in a second. But it's still a big question. Look, Chavin Cordero and Max Duggan as your 2 guys who could be good. Yes, they could be really good. We don't know that for sure. And I feel like people are trying to say that, oh, well, they upgraded the quarterback position. You can't really say that until you see it. A lot of ways, I think that I was one of the guys who thought it was more the offensive coordinator. I'm not going to sit here and say I thought AJ was an incredible quarterback last season. Before the injury, I still thought he was played himself out of the elite tier and into the great tier. Still a great quarterback, still a top 5 guy, but just not elite. The offensive coordinator, however, with Gradkowski, a lot of bad play calls, a lot of poor decisions, and a lot of it was his fault that McCarron kind of played himself out of that elite position. He was going to be back, ended up getting the job to the Lions. So the Battlehawks kind of ended up shooting themselves in the foot because now they have to fully redo their quarterback / offensive coordinator position. But yeah, great defense. Offense really wasn't all that great this past season. Their passing offense was much weaker than you expected it to be, with a 174 yards per game was actually the second worst in the league. Again, a lot of that I blame on the offensive coordinator. So there's a lot of big questions for them, but again, they still have a great roster overall. Jacob Saylors is an incredible running back. Getting him back is going to help out a ton. There's a reason why I was the all UFL running back this past season. But number 4, again, is a very good spot for them, and number 4 is where they should be. When you look at them, they did not bring back the core to the extent a team like Michigan did. They don't have the benefit of the doubt like a team like Birmingham does, and they don't have the coaching that a team like San Antonio does. So number 4 is a really good spot for them. Again, I still think they did better than Arlington in the offseason, which is why I moved them above them. So number 4 is St. Louis. Biggest loss is AJ McCarron. I mean, duh. Look, like I said before, his stats were still really solid overall. 15 TDs, 4 interceptions, 94 passer rating. It's just that glaring stat right there is that 6.2 yards per pass. That is really poor, especially when you compare it to guys like Luis Perez. Then you have Anthony Beck's statement, the UFL continues to be a league of opportunity, and we have come to the decision to move forward, looking at new opportunities at the quarterback position. AJ's been a tremendous part, blah, 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 past 2 seasons. It's with that respect that we wanted to provide him a clear path forward as he decides what to do in his future, which now looks like he's not going to play in the league this next season just because it just looks like that. Biggest loss. Look, I've seen a lot of people all of a sudden try to say that, it's a good thing he's gone. No. Look, he's one of the few guys where, again, this is different from like Te'amu. I've never been a huge believer in Te'amu. McCarron, I've seen him and I've been like, this is a guy who is still a really good quarterback at this level. What he did last season, again, half of it I could say is definitely his fault. The other half was that terrible offensive coordinator. The decision to make a lot of screen passes for their big receivers and not throw the ball downfield falls under both of them. I really wanted to see what he would do with a different offensive coordinator this season, and it's a shame we're not going to be able to see that. So we're not going to know exactly whose fault it is if the offense ends up being really good, but overall AJ is still the biggest loss this team had during the offseason. You lost your franchise quarterback, the guy who's been with you the past 2 seasons, led you to 2 7-3 seasons. Now, were those 2 7-3 seasons, great in the grand scheme of things? You didn't win a playoff game. But he was still a huge reason for that. I think that the way they kind of threw him under the bus was a really low move, and I'm not a fan of it. But we'll see. Hopefully for Battlehawks fans, it ends up working out to where McCarron looks poor, I guess. Like, I hate to say this, but for you Battlehawks fans, I would hope that McCarron looks bad in hindsight and Max Duggan or Cordero ends up being really good. We'll have to wait and see. Number 4, Battlehawks. Biggest loss, McCarron. Number 3 is San Antonio Brahmas. Do I think they have the weakest QB room in the league? 100%. Am I still putting them at number 3? 100%. You've got Wade Phillips as your head coach. You've got AJ Smith as your offensive coordinator. You can only put them so low. I mean, seriously. This team still has John Lovett at running back. Now, there's another running back which they lost, which we'll get to later. And they lost a few other guys, right? You lost Cody Latimer. Jacob Harris is going to be that replacement, the wide receiver tight end hybrid type of guy. That's mainly the reason you brought Harris back. You lost Alex Millette at center. That sucks. You lost some big pass rushers, Delonte Scott and Wyatt Ray. Then you also lost a decent amount of safeties, but you got a guy like Reedy Williams, a former high draft pick. So we'll see how he works out here. You did bring in Kellen Mond. Will he work out? We'll see. He was also a higher picked quarterback. If he works out, then it really doesn't matter how bad the QB room is as long as he stays healthy. And again, you have a really good offensive coordinator. The defense this past season was the best in the league. They allowed less than 150 points across the whole season, and they had 32 sacks. They're one of just 2 teams to hit that 30-sack mark, and their 256 yards per game was insanely good. Now, their offense was actually still a solid unit. Now, it wasn't incredible, but it was just under 300 yards per game and was still in that top 4. Like I said, the top 4 to the bottom 4, huge drop-off. So they still were in that top 4 spot. This was a really solid team. Yes, Chase Garbers kind of sold that championship game with that horrid performance. And yes, the game against St. Louis was still a blowout. They still did blow them out in that first playoff game. So, kind of mixed there, and it's a big reason why I put him at 3. At the end of the season, I said they were number 3 because if you were to have played them and the Panthers at that time, Panthers played the Stallions much better, despite also having to deal with injuries to their quarterback that was probably going to start that game had he been healthy. and of course their linebacker, but the Brahmas were also dealing with injuries. It's a tough one, but for that, look, we already talked about it. Most people pretty much agreed the Panthers were the second best team in the league last season at the end of it. And for me, the Panthers did a great job at keeping their core talent. They did a much better job at keeping their true core talent than any other team. It's actually kind of crazy, especially because for a while it looked like they weren't going to bring back a lot of their big defenders. But San Antonio still deserves to be number 3. And if you put them at number 2, I'm not fully against it. Again, my biggest issue with them is the quarterback position. I feel it is a very weak position. Kellen Mond is your starter, is a high-risk, high-reward type of player. And your backups, yikes. If you have to rely on those two guys, yikes. But they have still a good running back room, even though they lost the guy we're going to talk about in Anthony McFarland Jr., their biggest offseason loss. McFarland, when he came in the second half of the season, oh my God. If he had played a full season with the stats he put up, he would have led the league in scrimmage yards by a country mile. Hakeem Butler had like 650. McFarland was on pace for basically 800 yards of scrimmage. In the 5 games he played in, he had 190 rushing yards and 206 receiving yards. He was one of those guys that was guaranteed 1 long touchdown per week, just like a Marcus Sims at the running back position. He was just somebody who every week you knew he was going to either break 1 super long run or get 1 super long reception, and it was just over. So, got to put him at the biggest loss. Now, the postseason, another one. In the 2 games he played, he had 147 rushing yards. That was the most in the entire postseason. One of the few guys in the playoff games where both of them he looked really solid. He was a big loss. Now, they still have John Lovett, so they are still fine at the running back position. It's just that McFarland and Lovett was an unbelievably great duo to have, and it's a shame we're not going to see that duo again and only see one of them. But again, the team worked with multiple running backs. John Lovett just ended up with the most yards, and he's still going to be a solid player. Their biggest loss, though, is McFarland. Number 2 is the Michigan Panthers. Look, Rocky Lombardi, I'm just putting him because he's the quarterback they added, though he's probably not going to end up getting much playing time. The big additions are Arnold Tarpley, a former All-USFL player, and Keontae Schott, a guy who, depending on how much you believe Chris Odom, probably got utilized wrong this past season and in 2023 was an incredible player for the Breakers. A guy that's going to help their already insane pass rush. They're the other team that had 30 sacks. They brought back all of their really good pass rushers, and now you're adding Keontae Schott to that mix. I mean, come on. They lost like 1 big pass rusher, really. It's just, they're fine at pass rush. They're upgrading a bit at the safety position. This team was already a really good, well-rounded team. Now, they weren't the top tier of offenses and defense in a statistical yard standpoint. Yards per game was a little over 260, and their points allowed was over 170. Yards per game, they did hit the 300 mark on offense, though they weren't Arlington or Birmingham levels of good. They're still really solid. They dealt with injuries. Wes Hills is not returning, but a lot of people are not too upset about it because Colburn looked really well when he played last season, and there's a good idea of them getting some sort of backup running back to play really well. This is a team that just brought back a lot of its big players. Nakua is back, Speaks is back, Gidna is back, Sims is back, Mariner is back. Pretty much like every big name you can think of is back. Again, they're missing like a couple of players, but if you go to that Thorne document, you'll see what I mean. Very few players are not back, especially those that were like true high-end players. Mariner and Marcus Sims is one of the best 1-2 punches at the wide receiver position. Mariner was the number 1 PFF receiver, which granted, I'm not a huge PFF guy, but he was number 1 by a pretty decent margin, especially that game against Houston, which is incredible. Number 2 is the Panthers. I just find it kind of hard to put them lower when you have the offseason they had. They didn't need to add a lot of guys like these other teams did because they didn't really lose anyone. Again, they gave them a run for their money against the Stallions in the final game they played. If Perkins was healthy, it could have been different. Same with Gidna, but we'll never know for sure. Number 2 is Michigan. Biggest loss, though, is going to be Jake Bates. It's the cop-out. I get it. I could put Wes Hills here, but because you have Matt Colburn, I'm just going to go with Bates. Luke Bates, statistically, when you look at it, like this wasn't all that great. 17 to 22 for 77% isn't great. But he kicked multiple 60-yarders. He kicked multiple game-winning walk-off field goals. St. Louis, Arlington are the 2 big ones you think of. It's a big loss. He was somebody that legitimately won you multiple games this past season. And yes, in the final game against Birmingham in the regular season and in the playoff game, that was when he was at his worst. He missed that potential game-winning kick in Week 10, and then he missed that field goal near the end of the first half in this playoff game. But even aside from that, he was still a very good kicker for most of the season. I still stand by the fact that I don't think he should have been an all-USFL kicker. But losing somebody who won you multiple games is a big deal. That's why it's the biggest loss. Number 1, the Birmingham Stallions. Nobody should be shocked at this. They're number one. Look, they added guys like Shai Smith, Jerron Jones, who was a two-time All-USFL player, didn't play that well last year, still was a two-time All-USFL player, and they brought back Alex Magoo, who was part of that 2023 championship team. I don't have to make any point. I just have to show this on screen. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Until they get beat by legitimately like 20 or more, unless it's like a 15-0 shutout, or until they lose back-to-back games, they're the best team in the league. When they lost to San Antonio, I remember a lot of people putting San Antonio above them, and I said that's a bad idea. They're still the best team in the league. And what happened in the rematch, they shut them out 25-0. Until proven otherwise, the Stallions are the best team in the league. I don't care how many or how few guys they sign, how many or few guys they cut, how many or how few guys even suit up to play. Until they lose twice or get blown out, you have to put them as the best team in the league because for 3 seasons they have proven that. They have this many losses across all 3 seasons. 4 losses is less than the Renegades had when they won the XFL championship in 2023. Like, just think about that for a second. In 3 seasons, the Stallions have had less losses than a team that won a championship in the one league they didn't play in. And I mean playoff wins. They've won 2 playoff games in all 3 seasons. That's 6 wins. Again, that's more playoff wins than the Renegades had regular season wins in that season, as many as they had overall across the season. When you start looking at how dominant this team's been, they're number one. Biggest loss, though, I'm going to go with Adrian Martinez. I was debating on making the bold choice to say Taco was their biggest loss or DeAndre Tillman, but you got to go with the MVP. Look, he won the MVP, and while he got the somewhat undeserved championship game MVP, he still was the regular season MVP and deserved it. He was insane. He was a great rusher, great passer, much better rusher than he was passer. That's just because he literally led the league in rushing yards, and passing-wise, he was still incredible, just not to the Luis Perez level of passing. Biggest loss is him. Again, you could argue Taco Charlton easily or DeAndre Tillman, but gonna go with Martinez. It's the cop-out, is what it is. So that'll do it. This has been Zom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Again, we're getting closer and closer to the season starting. We're less than a month away. And remember, during the season, we're going to have multiple videos every week. We're going to have power rankings, week review, game picks. If they continue with the Fox Super 6, as well as one other video every week. So that's 4 videos and a short every week for sure, as well as probably going to be doing 2 play-by-play live streams every single week. So it's going to be great. Again, we have the 1,000 subscriber giveaway going on right now, so go check out that community post as the giveaway for that. The live one is tomorrow. Again, I have the Q&A post as well that was posted like a day or 2 after that, so go to that one as well. Let me know your thoughts down below in the power rankings. Who do you think is the best? Who do you think is the worst? Do you think I got them right with the biggest losses of each team? If you're a fan of the channel for a while, think about a community member. Community member is as low as 99 cents a month. You get 1 exclusive video per month, as well as multiple channel benefits that aren't that. You get exclusive team emojis. You get exclusive early posts to potential videos and all that. And as always, guys, have a great night.